Good afternoon, everyone. I see that many of you are coming in on the call. Thank you so much for waiting. If you could humor us today and just let us know what state you represent. If you could let us know what state you represent, that would be very helpful to us to kind of get an idea of who's on the call. And I see that Ohio is in the house. So is Texas. Very good. Maryland. All right, more Texans, Philadelphia, Illinois. This is great. Florida, that's where I am from. And wow, Amy, you've got a mixed group. We've got folks from all over the country, Chicago, the Virgin Islands, Atlanta, Wisconsin is in the house. So we've got a large crowd coming in today, guys, and I hope you've got your questions ready for us. We will want to hear everything that you'd like to ask Amy. We're going to be perusing the chat box for all of the questions. You have the ability to be able to share with your partners and all, and I'm just excited to see all of you there. We even have New York, Herman, in the house today. So this is really great. I think we'll have a good crowd. That's good. We've got over 300 people who have registered, and we're going to try and start right on time because Amy has so much information that she has to share with us. And we've already cut her short by 30 minutes, and I cannot cut her short anymore. So just hang in there with us because she's going to be sharing a lot of great information. Now, I will upload a copy of today's presentation later on in the presentation as Amy is going through it. But I wanted to wait until we get a significant number of people on the call. So if you can just bear with us. And for those of you who will not be able to download a copy because of your computer setup or because of other issues there, we will send out a copy of today's presentation in the follow-up email. So I just can't tell you, y'all are in for a treat. We've got a great speaker that will be presenting for us today. When I first heard her speak about maybe I think it was about 6 months ago, I thought, wow, I've got to get this young lady to come and speak for our members and share her thoughts with our members. And she graciously agreed to be a part of the presentation for us today. And you're going to get the same thing that I heard, and I was impressed. And I know that you're going to walk away as impressed as I was. We're going to use the Zoom platform. And so with Zoom, I just want you to know we've opened it up where you can communicate with your colleagues. So just put all of your questions in the chat box. We've got 2 individuals, and I'll introduce them to you very shortly, that will be perusing the chat box for questions if you have any. And if you can think of something that you come to this training with, just make sure you put it in the chat box, and we'll try to get it over to Amy to answer those questions for you. Let's see. I've got my little cheat sheet here. Please don't forget to do the survey at the end of today's presentation. We need you to do that. And I've got one of my major funders and partners as part of today's class, and that's Freddie Mac. And Latanya Gonzalez will be, Latanya, if you can come on. Yes, Latanya will welcome you here. I just want to tell you all, thank you for being present, and I look forward to hearing more from you on what you have to share. Latanya?
Thank you, Cora, so much on behalf of Freddie Mac. I am so happy to see over 100 participants on this platform. I even saw St. Louis and then I saw Puerto Rico. And I was like, oh my goodness, not one from Puerto Rico, but more than three. I see Maryland out there. So thank you on behalf of Freddie Mac, a secondary mortgage company that does more than purchase loans from the primary markets of banks and credit unions. We also provide financial literacy information in the form of Credit Smart for the last 20 years. Wealth building has been an ongoing effort for Freddie Mac. As we put people into homes, it is extremely important that we also find the right professionals to help them protect and transfer this asset so they can start creating intergenerational wealth. I want to thank this partnership with the National Foundation for Credit Counseling. I'm going to ask Herman Palmer to come on. He has been integral in getting all of our organizations together to start this initiative throughout the country. Herman, take it away.
Thank you, Latanya. I appreciate you. And good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's presentation on wills and estate planning. In conjunction with Diversified Resource Network, this is part of the National Foundation for Credit Counseling State-Based Alliance Economic Empowerment Series. I want to start by thanking our planning committee, our presenter, our sponsors, Wells Fargo, Freddie Mac, TD Bank, and certainly you, our listening audience. As you've heard, my name is Herman Palmer. I'm the Vice President of Outreach and Inclusion for the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, or the NFCC. Our mission is to empower consumers to address their financial challenges and take charge of their futures. I'm excited about today's presentation because I think it's a very timely subject, wills and estate planning. Here's the thing. This seems to be a topic few, if anyone, wants to discuss, but as soon as it's needed, we often find ourselves either ill-prepared or totally unprepared at a time when we can least afford it, when we are dealing with a loss and we are perhaps at our most vulnerable emotionally. For this reason, it is very important that we take the opportunity to make our wishes known and record them using legal documents. So before we begin, I want to review some ground rules. This is a safe space. It's provided for all attendees to get access to information they need to achieve better outcomes. What that means is this: there are no dumb questions, all right? There's no judgment. Ask any question you have. Chances are, if it occurred to you, the same thought has occurred to 3 or 4 other folks. And what happens, a lot of times are embarrassed, people are embarrassed or they're self-conscious, they don't ask the questions and nobody gets the answer that they're looking for. So, no dumb questions, please ask. There's gonna be a brief survey at the end of this session. I'd ask that you please help us out by responding. Now, with all that done, it is my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's presenter, Amy Griffin. Amy is the principal of the Life and Legacy Counselors of the Griffin Firm, an estate planning firm that seeks to educate and facilitate the creation, protection, and transfer of wealth. The Life and Legacy Counselors stand on the core values of FIRST, F-E-R-S-T, faith, excellence, relationships, service, and trustworthiness. Creating a legacy through estate planning discusses the strategies and opportunities to build. Amy's goal is to build strong communities, one family at a time. And her mantra is, we are better together. It is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce the speaker for this afternoon's Wills and Estate Planning presentation, Ms. Amy Griffin. Amy, please come forward and educate me.
Thank you, Herman. Thank you, Cora. Thank you, Latanya, who make this stuff happen. Now, I will say, first, I have to say point of privilege. I saw Springfield, Massachusetts in the room. I'm from Springfield, and great things come from Springfield, Massachusetts. So I had to, when I saw that, I started screaming, but nobody could hear me because I was on mute. So I am thrilled and honored to be able to present to you guys, not because I'm all that, but because you are. And I am thoughtful about how it is that you all will be transformational in our world, in our country. And I always, as Herman said, when we know better, we do better. And so you guys can take this information and employ it in such a way that it is transformational. So I am so thrilled because I know that we can change the world when we do this stuff, right? And so I'm going to share my screen, and I always try to apologize ahead of time for my technological shortcomings. I am who I am, and I'm probably too old to change, but I'm still, whoops. So I apologize. It's going to be okay anyway. All right. So I always start off with a couple of things. First and foremost, showing a picture of our team, because I think it's pretty powerful, number one. But number two, what I encourage people to be thoughtful about is when you are creating a team of support, whenever you're looking to trusted advisors, know what their core values are. Know what your who they are. And our core values, we put out there: faith, excellence, relationship, service, and trustworthiness, because we all come with a bias. And I say that honestly, knowing that I have a bias and the advice that I provide is biased. So if you know what my bias is, you can say, okay, no, I don't really want to hear all of that. But you know who I am, and then you can create a filter. So whenever you identify a trusted advisor, make sure that you know who they are, what they are. I also present the team because it is so not about me. While I get to be the principal, I get to be out front for most of the stuff. The reality is that I can't do squat diddly without a team support, right? So, and I encourage you that when you folks create relationships, know who the backup is, know who the bench is, so that when I go, because I'm going to go, because this is about estate planning, that knowing that there is a backup, so that when I go, that there people are not just sort of stuck out there alone, but they have a team that will continue to support them. So I always share with it, our URL is yourestateplanningattorney.com. So with that being said, that's easy to find us, but to knowing that when you're identifying an estate planning attorney, that it's not just any attorney, because, you know, we have attorneys that do divorce, criminal, all sorts of other stuff. So making sure that the person that you know has the depth of knowledge that you need to make sure that you achieve the goal that you want. You don't go to a podiatrist when you have a headache. You don't go to a cardiologist when your arm hurts. So making sure that the person that you have is relevant. And of course, the great disclaimer is that this is not legal advice, this is legal education, so that you can make sure that you have the information that you need to be transformational, because you're going to make change. Okay. So now, I will say to you that you'll see that I do a lot of stuff in the Black community. So my representations reflect that. Because what we know is so often people feel just so disconnected, thinking this ain't about me, I ain't got all that, I can't do this. And so because I speak a lot to the Black community, a lot of my representations are to the Black community, reflect the Black community. But this is the law across all communities. So don't feel like this ain't you, because it is. All right. So I want to always encourage people to know that, yeah, what we're talking about, you hear a lot about the fact that Martin Luther King was an amazing legacy builder, right? And we have capacity to create that great legacy. Now, Martin Luther King didn't have a will. And as a result, his children spent days, weeks, months, years in court, and lots and lots and lots of dollars. Chadwick Boseman didn't have a will. He had a trust, but he didn't have a will. And as a result, $1 million went to the court. Aretha Franklin. Now, she was a sister who didn't trust a whole lot of folks. And so she did her own will. They found a bunch of them around, and they were not legally adequate. So much so that her niece, who was appointed, said, no, I'm not in this. I can't do this. I cannot represent. I can't be the executor. And the woman in the middle of the top row, most of y'all probably don't even know who she is. She is one of my sheroes. So I never met her, but she was a laundry woman in Southern Mississippi. And when she died, she left $150,000 to the University of Southern Mississippi. When she died, she left $15,000 to her church and money to her family. Now, I say that to say the impact that we can have if we make a decision to make an impact. I am so passionate about the change that we can make as a community if we choose to make it. So Chadwick Boseman had some issues, Ree had some issues, so did Martin. But Ursula McCarty, in her limited revenue, did made a great impact. So I encourage us all to be thinking about who we are, what we can do, because we can change the world if we are thoughtful about how to do that.
Amy, can I say one thing about Osceola McCarthy?
Yep.
All right, so washerwoman, like you said, she quit high school. She quit to help her family, never finished high school, never went to college. All she had was minimal wage jobs. And yet she was disciplined enough to not only accumulate wealth, but she was organized enough to see it transferred in accordance with her wishes. It's not how much you make, it's what you do with it and how you plan.
Exactly.
Cassie,
one of
I'm sorry, Amy, Cassie is saying that Miss McCarthy lived in her community, in her
Wow.
town of Hattiesburg. So
Yes,
that
Hattiesburg.
means a lot, yeah.
See, and so she knows. So I'm sure that she is I can't remember, who did you say is doing this? Who is in Hattiesburg?
It was Cassie,
So
Cassie.
Cassie is out there ringing this bell. She is making sure that the changes are happening, the impacting change. So, next time you'll do the presentation, Cassie, because clearly you know the importance. I know that you are on the bandwagon of getting that estate plan done, because we can make a huge difference. So one of the things that I've done is created the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, so that we can make sure that we are thoughtful and strategic about coming together to bridge the racial wealth gap. And I'm so excited that Hermond is one of the board members, because we know that we're better together. And so as such, we have these strategic partners that come together to be thoughtful about how do we bridge the racial wealth gap? Because not any of us can do it alone, but we all have to do it together. And the reason why that's important is that with high tide, all boats rise. When we raise the bottom, we all are lifted. And that impacts our community in such an amazing way, right? So when we talk about legacy, it means something different to everybody. And so I get to show off my loved ones right here, right now. The fruit of my loin, my children, the big ones, the old ones are my children. And the babies are my son's daughters. And so what's really important for me is to identify those things that are important, right? And what's our why? And so many times we live our lives and we do the things that are not so easy because of the why. And so we can each dig deep down to find what the why is. We don't have to dig so deep at all sometimes. But if we can think about, and I'm a person of faith, as I said in my first thing, is that scripture says, leave an inheritance for your children's children. That means I can't blow it all. I can't be the one to say that I zeroed out when I die, because it's about how am I transformative? And we know that our communities are better if we strategically build. And what I also want to point out to folks, as Osceola McCarthy pointed out, when we talk about our children's children, it's not our biological children necessarily, right? We can have community children. We can have, spiritual children. We have children we don't even know of, but we can make a difference and we can be transformational for those people who come after us, because the world is better because we were here, right? So estate planning. Now, so many times people I only know what it means. It means all of the things that we make a plan for, all of the things that happen for my financial life, for my children's financial life, the people that I care about, the charities that I care about, incorporating my life insurance, my property, my business, all of those things we pull together and we plan accordingly to make sure that we have this comprehensive strategy for not just my life, but my children and my children's children's life and the people that I care about. It don't have to be any relationship to me legally. Right. So when we think and look at, there is a pyramid of, just like my organ, there's a pyramid for everything, food and all that stuff. But first and foremost, when we talk about the bottom plan, the bottom level, the lowest level of planning, it's just to even think about my okay, right? Do I have my stuff in place? Do I have stuff in place, those things that will ensure my safety for my lifetime, for my retirement, for if I'm incapacitated, all of those things, do we have those things in mind, right? Do we have those things in place? And then the next level is my family. Okay, now, many of us think of our family before we think of ourselves, but this typical thing is building a family, because a lot of times folks don't even have a family. But am I planning for not just my myself, but my kids' and my kids' kids? Am I able to build a structure to make sure that we are thinking about how do I avoid taxes? How do I make sure that my business is passed on to my loved ones in a way that makes sense? And again, my loved ones aren't just my biological or relationships. It can be the people who work with me or for me. It can be the people that I am in service for. All of those things are strategically building and planning for that is my family and community okay? And then my community is okay. That's charitable giving. Now, many folks I know are very, because I'm a person of faith and I go to church a lot, and I know a lot of people who do. Are we able to, or we go to schools, went to schools that changed our lives, were impactful? We want to be able to give to them as well. We want to make sure those people, like Osceola McCarty did, was making sure that those people who come behind us are able to take advantage of the opportunities. And sometimes because those opportunities no longer exist, that we're able to create those opportunities for people who come beyond, who come after us. But we get to create that legacy pyramid because, again, if we think beyond just ourselves, we're able to build a community that's stronger. Now, and I love the fact that y'all are like all over the country again. And what I wanted to identify is how important your job is in that you're housing counselors. Now, you guys are really strategic and thoughtful about getting people into houses. My whole thing is that we're trying to make sure that we are thoughtful about how do we perpetuate the ownership for multiple generations. And I took a few cities to identify what the impact of that is, right? And so we just focused on the fact that in the Black community, again, that's where I speak to often, only 30% of folks have an estate plan, right? That means that those people who don't, the 70%, just throw it up in the air and let the government do what's best for them. Let's be clear, they're doing what's best for the government, not what's best for me and my family, right? Now, I will say to you that most of us have families that are a little atypical, right? I'm a third generation blended family. So that, of course, means that it's like, it's not going to reflect the standard, picket fence kind of thing. So we need to be thinking about how do we pick and craft what's best for our family. Again, I can only speak to my community, but sometimes we get married without getting married. We get divorced without getting divorced. And we have kids. We adopt kids without adopting those kids. So therefore, with that in mind, our family structure does not reflect what the good court has identified or the good state has identified. So I want to identify 3 jurisdictions and the impact, right? And it's pretty impressive. If we're transformational, changing, so increased by 40% the number of people who have estate plans and avoid probate for their property. If we look at in Philly, where the mean price home value in 2019 was $183,000. If we look at 2,000 families that increase to maintain, the impact, the financial legacy impact is $366,400,000. Now, LA, if we say the median value was 200,000, which I'm sure is lower now, the legacy impact is $400 million. And in DC, where the median home value was $646,000, the legacy impact would be 1.2, almost $1.3 trillion. So, the work that we do is so impactful. So often that sometimes we don't understand, we can't express it to our folks, what the transformational change can be. And here are 3 cities that we identify what it can be. So impacting multiple generations to build wealth. What we know is unfortunately, so often we're just trying to live paycheck to paycheck. And if we plan living paycheck to paycheck, we're not going to be able to make a huge impact. But if we can plan generation to generation to generation, we can be transformational, right? Because we can only see as far as that next week, we're going to make decisions that are just that next weekable, right? But if we can make decisions or have a vision for our children's children, we will transform our community. Right. So 3 base things that everybody should have at the age of 18, 3. First and foremost is that durable power of attorney. And that gives somebody capacity to act on your behalf for financial matters. And that's as limited or as expansive as you choose it to be. And it could be for a limited period of time, or it can go until the date of death, or it can go just until you change it. So you need to be thinking about who is it that someone that you would want to make decisions for you financially. The second block is that healthcare packet. So what's the proxy? Who would you identify to serve as your proxy? Who would you want to make sure that would make the decisions that you would make regarding your healthcare decisions if you were unable to speak for yourself? Then the advanced directive living will tells them what you want them to say. Because if indeed you you don't want them to make a decision what they want to have said for you. I have two amazing children, and I know that as you saw, my son, but my daughter would keep me plugged in as long as there's electricity on the earth. My son's wife says that I've outlived my stay. So we get to plan either way. But what has been painful to me is when people call my office and say that, I'm not speaking to my brother because he killed my mom, removing life-sustaining treatment. So we get to make the decision for our family. I encourage people to be thinking about the 2 G's that we're guarding against: greed and grief. And those things are powerful. And we can put the guardrails in place so it doesn't happen. We get to do that. Now, the last will and testament. Now, most of us don't have one, right? Most of us don't have one at all. And the thing is that it's a confusion, because on TV, they have this whole thing where they'll have a reading of the will. And I honestly don't do a lot of readings of the will. They expect, people call me and ask me to do it, and then they want to come into my conference room where I can open their will and read it to them. Now, I could do that, but I typically tell people, you don't really want me to do that. You don't want to pay me to read to you, because my reading doesn't do a thing. And on TV, it creates the illusion that there's a powerful impact of my reading of the will. And then that means one can go forth and do what the will says, but that's not the case at all. The reading of the will doesn't do anything. The will has absolutely no power until the court determines, the judge signs an order giving someone the capacity to act on behalf of that will, to authorize the action of the will. Because we have to go through a whole period of people being able to contest the will, and all sorts of transactions that need to take place. And I will say to you that a last will and testament and all of the probate process, which is what the will directs, is based on each state law. Each state can be slightly different. And so I encourage you, which is why we can't serve the whole world, but the whole country, but because each state has its own specificity. So I encourage you to be thinking about find out, and we can help you find out those people who are not in the jurisdictions that we are. Find out with those people who are able to help you determine what's the state laws. Right. Okay. So,
Amy?
Yes.
Before you move on, there are so many questions on, should you have a living will? Should my young children have one? And is it possible to create a trust under a joint tenancy?
I'm going to answer your questions a little bit later about that, about the joint tenancy piece, because we're going to talk about real property altogether.
Perfect.
And I will say to you that your young child, if your young child is 18 and up, yep, they should have an estate plan. If they're under 18, they cannot. You are responsible. You have the authority to act on behalf of anybody under 18, but over 18. One of the things I said when you go to college, you should have your stuff together. Right. So that the first document we had was the power of attorney. And it is who's going to handle your finances when you're not able to. And I will say that not only when you're not able to, I am so thoughtful. When my children went to college, they were not the brightest bulbs in the box because they were only 18 and they didn't know a whole lot. And as well as there was a lot of adult responsibility that's facing them at 18. And so I had the opportunity or the responsibility to support them. And so for people who are going to college, I encourage them to have those base documents in place. And in addition, if they're going to college, get the FERPA waiver, which is the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act, right? Now, I said to my kids, as long as I'm paying anything, I get to know everything. And so they don't get a right to privacy when, when I'm still paying. But the FERPA waiver means that the college or the school can talk to me directly without getting permission from my children. But the children who have, they're expected to just be grown-ups at 18, but they don't typically have the education or the wisdom or the experiential wisdom to make those decisions. So I encourage people to have someone to serve as your power of attorney when someone turns 18, and it should not be Pookie, right? Your oldest child, just because he's your oldest child. Identify someone who has integrity, has financial savvy, and as well as you don't typically need to let them borrow some money to get through the month. So knowing that if we're incapacitated, our bills aren't going to stop. So we don't want to have our car repossessed, our home foreclosed on or evicted because we were in the hospital. So we need to make sure that we have somebody who can manage our finances for us. And that advanced directive living will is that what is it that we would want to have the decision to be made for us? And I used two examples. John Pierre Adams, he was in the hospital for a minor surgery. And unfortunately, there was malpractice. And he ended up being in a coma for 39 years. Terry Schiavo, a young lady in Florida, she was in an accident. And unfortunately, she was in a persistent vegetative state. It was horrible, and then we built on that horror with the fact that her husband wanted to let her die naturally by not continuing to have her provide her nutrition or hydration and let her pass away. However, her mom said she would rather have her be alive in any way, shape, or form than allow her to die. They went to the Florida Supreme Court. And unfortunately, I find it so painful that I'm sure that the mother and the husband both loved her, but they were at odds against each other because of the legal suit. Again, the Florida Supreme Court. And so I encourage people to be thinking about, I don't want to force anybody else to be in the position to play God. I want them to know what I would want for them. There are certain states, such as the District of Columbia, where you have the right to die states. If you're given a terminal diagnosis that says you have less than 6 months to live, you can make the choice to end your life. But you've got to make sure that you make that decision on your own. And you don't want to make that for someone else, because that, assisted suicide is not legal in most places. So I encourage you to make the decision for yourself and to share that information with the people that you love. Probate. When you don't have a will, you allow the government to determine who gets your assets and how. One of the things that many people unfortunately believe is that, okay, I'm married, my husband's gonna get everything. No, your husband will get a fraction of everything, depending on the state, or husband or your wife, or, and then there are some states where there's common law marriage. And there's some states where it's not recognized, or it's very difficult to recognize. So I encourage people to know what it is. But I will say to you that one of the things that makes me crazy about the probate is that probate is, I believe, one of the greatest scams ever. Because you have to create a lawsuit against yourself in order to give your loved ones the stuff that you have. So when you go to the court will first put a notice in the paper that said Amy died. Does she owe you any money? And so we have to wait until a certain time period for the notice to go forth, and them to say, Sears and Roebuck to come forward to say, oh yes, she owes me for that credit card, student loan, or if I was in the hospital before I passed away, the hospital gets to come forward to say this is her bill. And so all of those folks got to come, we have to wait for them to come forward. And then they get paid first before you can distribute the assets. The other great scam that we've got going here is that based on the amount of assets that I have, that's how much we pay the court. Now, I feel like that's a scam because the reality is the court isn't working any harder or less hard on my stuff. So me paying them based on my assets is a scam. So I encourage folks to avoid the probate process, right? And you get to make those decisions, right? How do you do that? With real property especially. You can do transfer on death deeds in some jurisdictions. In other jurisdictions, we do what is called a life estate deed. That means I will continue to own my property during my lifetime, but when I pass away, it goes to whomever I identify on this transfer on death deed. It avoids the probate process, which is really very important, especially if you have real property, that is your principal asset. Right. So because remember I said that the first thing they do is they put a notice in the paper for creditors. So if I only have a house and it goes through probate and all of my creditors come forward, Sears and Roebuck, American Express, and I have a house and I don't have any cash, my house has to be sold or my loved ones have to come up with the cash to pay for those creditors in order to pass that property. And again, as I said, real property is sometimes the greatest asset that we have. So we really want to preserve and protect that. So when we think about that transfer on death deed or the life estate deed, it transfers while avoiding probate. And so they still have to pay the mortgage. Let me be clear. You don't have to stop. They don't have to stop paying the mortgage, but they don't have to pay for the Sears and Roebuck bill or the American Express bill or the hospital bill as a result of that. And then for all of your accounts, you can set up beneficiaries doing some payable on death you can choose to use, but you need to make sure that all of those things can pass without going through the probate process. And so I will say to you that it's almost, you can't necessarily guarantee it, but we really work hard to minimize those things that go through probate. So,
Amy?
yeah.
There's a question here from Jennifer. Does the Lady Bird deed avoid probate?
Yes.
Okay.
Lady Bird is one of those, like a life estate deed. It's a type of life estate deed. Okay. So remember earlier, I talked about the three things you should have is the will, the power of attorney, and the healthcare. So advance directive and proxy. Well, if you don't have the advance directive, if you don't have the power of attorney, and you can no longer make decisions for yourself, then the court gets involved. When the court gets involved, that means there is a guardianship sought, that you can't make decisions for yourself, and then there is a guardian. And so why that is painful is because, one, that means the court monitors each and every step. There has to be, whenever they want to move someone who is under guardianship, you have to go to the court. Whenever you want to change the treatment, and you have to report to the court annually, the quality of their life, et cetera. So now, even I'm a lawyer and I don't like going to court, so I can imagine, and I get paid to go there. I imagine that most folks don't like to do that. But let me just, again, speak about the guardianship. Now, what the role is of the guardian is to identify first and foremost if indeed the person who is disabled needs a guardian, if they are no longer competent to make decisions for themselves. And to achieve that outcome, you have a lawyer for the person who's filed for the petition on behalf of the disabled person, a lawyer for the disabled person, and a neutral lawyer. And with that being said, that the person who's disabled is paying for all of those people, right? All of those lawyers are being paid from the resources of the disabled person. And so that's why I say you don't really want to do that. And the other reason why you don't really want to do that is if indeed your loved one is unable to serve as guardian by either not having the credit score high enough to receive a bond, or if they've had some sort of criminal background. You know, let's say they went they made a mistake and they went to prison years ago, they came out, they still can't pass a background check. And so therefore they can't serve as a guardian. And then we've had lawyers who serve. And I'm not saying that lawyers are bad. I think lawyers are some of my favorite people because my brother, my sister, but anyway. But as a result, you're paying for them. I had an attorney petition to say that it took him an hour to go to the bank, an hour to open a bank account on behalf of the disabled person, and an hour to get back to his office. That was 3 hours. And at $400 an hour, that was $1,200 out of the bank account of the disabled person. So I encourage you, if you have that power of attorney, you don't ever need to have a guardianship. You can act on behalf of your person that you love.
Amy, this is LaTanya. They have asked about affordable cost options for low-income families. And one suggestion was to partner with local law schools in your area.
Absolutely. Many law schools have clinics. Actually, I know that Howard's having one, I think, this weekend. And in addition, A lot of times there are legal aid services. I know that we've done a number of clinics. So there are many ways in which, but again, everything is jurisdiction specific. That's part of the struggles. I can't speak to the whole wide world, but I know many churches have clinics that, talk about estate planning clinics as well.
Amy, we got another question. If one has a trust, do you still need a will?
So the answer is yes. And it's, as I was saying, with Chadwick Boseman, he had a will, he had a trust, and most of his assets were in there. And so if you have a will, then it catches anything that does not get tethered to the trust one way or the other. Okay.
There is a question on beneficiaries, Amy. If they are not a blood relative, can you still have them as a beneficiary?
Absolutely. Now, you can give your stuff to anybody you want to give your stuff to. You don't, again, with one exception. So you can disinherit your kids because they don't act right, but you can't disinherit your spouse. Your spouse, except for in Georgia. You can disinherit in every other state but in Georgia. So
Amy, here's another question for you. What about debt? So if I die and all of the debt is in my name only, will my husband be responsible for that debt?
Only if you go through probate. Only if he is, like, if co-signed on anything, yes. Other than that, like the probate, that's why one of the great reasons, and I try not to sound so happy about the fact that if I can avoid probate when I die and I still have student loan debt, it can die with me because nobody has co-signed on my debt. And the only way to get money from a stone is if the stone has money, right? So probate is the way in which you can get money from a dead person if there are any assets there. But if there are no assets going through the probate process, no. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage people to avoid the probate process as well.
All right, we got another one. I owned a home titled to me with good equity now, just got married, no prenup. If something happens to me, I want my house to go to my kids. How do I proceed?
Okay, so again, I don't ever want to be that nervous Nelly or that, oh yeah, now I tell people I'm a professional pessimist. What I encourage people to do, and we'll talk about that a bit later, is about when you are in a blended family and what is the expectation. So oftentimes I encourage people to give your spouse a life estate and then the remainder interest to go to your children when you pass away, so that everybody is respected. She has a place to live, she or he has a place to live. And so, but your children still get the benefit after you've passed away.
Okay, I'm recommending that we hold all questions now because you got to get through the presentation.
And I do answer a lot of these questions as we go on, right? So beyond the foundation, one of the things that I encourage people to be thinking about, especially if you have minor children, that you should indeed have an estate plan, because you don't want just the first person to volunteer to be the guardian. I say that creepy Uncle Jimmy is going to be the first one to say, well, I'll take that cutums, that cherub. No, we want to make sure the person that we identify has the values, the parental values that you have, has the resources that you have, or that you can trust them with your resources. That, we want to make sure that the right person is the one who is going to raise your child, right? And then the revocable living trust and the irrevocable living trust, those are categories of trust. Now, the revocable living trust is typically where we put our principal residence in, because it is a legacy building trust. It avoids probate, it maintains privacy. And I especially try to support people who have more than one kid to make sure that their house is in a revocable trust. Because then if you can't give half a house to a kid without the expectation that the house is going to be sold, because so I can get my half or she can get her half. And so if it's an irrevocable trust, and you can make the decision as to when you can make it an income producing property, you can make it an asset that, that you can choose how it is managed, as opposed to one of them saying, I'm forcing the sale. If you have multiple kids, one kid can force the sale of the property partition. They, can be bought out, But again, if your child doesn't have the resources, the other child doesn't have the resources to buy them out, then it wreaks havoc. And I would think I have 4 cases right now where we are in court in litigation because people are trying to make something happen. The irrevocable living trust. Now, this is really important when we think about many of our folks who are lower income, but then they end up in needing long-term care. If we put our house in an irrevocable trust, it can preserve it for beyond the nursing home care. Because when Medicaid happens, if indeed you have someone who needs Medicaid or be a nursing home, when that person passes away, if it's not jointly owned, they want to get reimbursed for all of the money that was spent out. And so if it's in an irrevocable trust, means that there's not a mortgage on it. If it's in an irrevocable trust, 5 years before the time that it is over, before they pass away, then we know that they can't put a lien on the property. And we also use irrevocable living trust when there is a person who has special needs. And then there's strategic business planning, but we're not going to talk about that one right now. So I encourage people to be thinking about what is the ripple effect, right? So like, again, mom and dad, especially when we take about real property, grandma and grandpa had 2 kids, one of her kids had 2 kids, one had 3. And so what does that impact? And so often we have that revelation or realization with real property. And so things get disseminated, they get diluted, they get lost. And so unfortunately, if we don't go through the probate process, sometimes we end up with, we had people who had 150 owners to the real property. And so again, not only does it get lost, unfortunately, what happens is that there is a often sort of abandonment because no one can do anything with it. And if no one can do anything with the real property, then the taxes don't get paid because you can't make any repairs to it. And therefore, unfortunately, what happens is then it's abandoned and sold at tax sale and the whole family loses out. So I encourage people to be thinking about how do I want to make sure our assets get passed? It's not necessarily just the divide and distribute. I encourage people to be thinking about our children. If you have a minor child and you pass away, what will happen is the court will create a trust. And then upon the child's 18th birthday, they receive it all. Now, I don't know about y'all, but when I was 18, I was dumb as a rock. I did not make good decisions. I didn't make good decisions until I was 45. That's a whole other different story. But we need to be thinking about if we're trying to plan and support for multiple generations, how do we build? How do we plan for our minors? How do we think about creating long-term care? If we have life insurance for our kids, we want to make sure that we are planning for our life insurance that it's going to end up with our kid. Do we want to give our kid, when they turn 18, $500,000 or $1 million or however $1 million you have, even $100,000, that if you want that to your kid to get that lump sum, I could bet on the fact that they would quickly lose it. I tell you that I'm a professional pessimist. So often, too often, people make rash decisions, grief decisions that to make themselves feel better, they spend all sorts of money. And so that's why I encourage people to be thinking about how do we want to plan for this in the future? How do we want to make it work? And so I think about even something as simple as how do we pay for the funeral? Because what we know is oftentimes you're not even going to get a death certificate for a couple of weeks. Right. So if you don't have a death certificate, you don't necessarily have capacity to go after and secure the assets in order to pay for the funeral. How does that work? How do you plan for a thing at a time? And I also encourage people to how do we avoid creditors or support your family creditors from creditors? We get to make those plans, but we only can do that if we indeed do plan. And so we also need to know, and I think that we get to talk about how do we manage taxes as well? One of the ways in which we lose property a lot is through the taxes that we have on our real property, and especially capital gains, right? And so one of the things that we think about, we need to prepare and plan for making sure that we're able to transfer our assets in a way that makes sense for the best interest for our family, right? So that we can not just make money, but we can keep it for the greater, for the benefit of our children's children. Again, real property, and I know you guys are housing counselors, so I really, really know the importance of the work that you do. Because in my community, the Black community, the net worth is the rent property is 67% of our net worth. And so if we lose our houses, then we're going to lose 67% of our net worth, because real property appreciates and money evaporates. So I encourage people to be thinking about, how do we preserve for multiple generations? I'm so thrilled when I get to meet people who have multiple homes based on the assets that somebody left them. But I also am always trying to be thoughtful and encouraging them to think about, how do we protect them? And so we need to think about, how do we balance all those things? One of the things that I always try to make sure people walk away with me hearing me say, it is a very rare case that I want you to put your child's name on your deed, right? Because, in 95% of the cases, it doesn't pay well to do that. And the reason why is for capital gains. When we think about what capital gains is, the difference between what you buy something for and what you sell it for is the gain. And living in DC, where property appreciates really high, I'm going to use an extreme example because it was my neighbor, right, in Northwest DC, which has evolved into a high rent district, or high property value district. He bought the property 60 years ago, and he bought it for $17,000. The property is now worth $700,000, and I'm going to say $17,000 to make my math easy. So if he were to sell the property now, he'd have to pay taxes on capital gains, which is $700,000. That distinction is between the $700,000 and 23% of that is what is taxed. So if he puts his kid's name on the deed with him, it's as if the kid bought it for the $17,000. And so when the kid sells it, they have to pay the capital gains on the difference between what he bought it for and what he sold it for. However, if he doesn't put the kid's name on the deed, but he does a transfer on death deed, transfers as a result of the inheritance, or put it in trust, then it's as if the kid bought it for the fair market value at the receipt. So in that case, for the $700,000. And that in itself is financial, savvy. We get to preserve it as opposed to having to pay the capital gains tax. JTROS is joint tenancy with a right of survivorship. That's what I call the last man standing law. If you have a house and you have it owned and you own it with joint tenancy with a right of survivorship, that means, okay, so if I own it with my husband and he dies first, the house goes to me. If I die first, the house goes to him. And that's sort of okay in many cases if we are a typical nuclear, not typical, if we are the standard nuclear family where we are married and we have kids that are both of ours. However, that's not my story. But I tell people I'm third generation blended family. So if indeed I didn't have an estate plan and I died, no, my husband died first and it came to me and I didn't have an estate plan, it would go to my children. His children would not get the benefit. So I encourage people to be, especially those folks with a blended family, to be very thoughtful about how do you want to strategically plan and build for those folks going forward. Right? Then a reverse mortgage. So often people don't really understand the implications of a reverse mortgage. If indeed you have for those seniors who are able to get a reverse mortgage, and I will say there are times, not a lot of times, when I'm an advocate for a reverse mortgage, because reverse mortgage is when you pull the equity out of the property, right? And you take, in essence, a loan from the property, and it continues to grow interest. So the longer you live, the greater the loan is. And so then when you pass away, that's when the loan is called. And that's when the owner who would have inherited it gets to determine if they can refinance the property or if it's indeed underwater, and then they lose it. So we get to make those decisions for ourselves, but I encourage people to have those conversations with the people that they expect to inherit so that they can be thoughtful. Because unfortunately, I had a case where a young man, not so young, but he was living with his parents, and when his mom died, then the reverse mortgage was due, and then he found himself homeless because he thought that he was going to just be able to stay in the house. So I encourage people to think about that. And there are times when you don't know who to give your house to. And we've had many cases where people have given their houses to their charitable organizations, HBCUs, community foundations accordingly. We get to make those decisions, but we get to plan for it. We have to plan for it. Be thinking again about the legacy that a real property is creating for us. And I'm not going to go into the business owner's peace of mind, but I say to any business owner, you should also have a plan, a strategic plan that plans for the disability, divorce, departure, dissolution, and death. Right. So actually, I realized I did not, whoops, stop sharing. I didn't talk about Medicaid. And one of the things that I encourage people to think about is that if indeed something happens and there's a need for long-term care, many of us, many of us don't have the resources that are necessary to pay that that nursing home bill. I've had clients who had to pay $12,000 a month for that. And if indeed that happens, that you can become eligible because there is not, you can own your house, you can own a car, but almost everything else is a countable asset. And so if indeed you're able to reduce your countable assets significantly low by using an irrevocable trust, or there are a number of ways that we use that. But then the greatest thought is after you've become eligible, one uses the nursing home or even care in the home, what happens is after the fact, when you passed away, that the state will put a lien on your real property if there is any. And therefore that require that the lien be satisfied through other assets or through the selling of the property. So I encourage people to be very thoughtful about how do we protect that from happening? Because again, we want to preserve that real property. Now, any questions?
Amy, it has been the most questions I have seen on a chat before. But if you could do one thing, could you please put your contact information back there? Because I have people that would like for you to contact them directly, but I think we need to let them know where you service, your service area, and how to get in touch with you.
Okay. So.
And there's a bunch of questions. Herman, Cora, where should we start?
So first, this is our website. And so we have you can go through our website. My personal email is Amy, AIMEE I'll put it in the chat, lifeandlegacy.law. And we serve, the states that we serve are first and foremost, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina.
Thank you. That was one of our earlier questions. Herman?
Yeah, I gotta say, those are what you serve, Amy, but you also have relationships in other states, correct?
Absolutely. I almost can get almost any state. So that's one thing about it. My mission was to build the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals so that we can reach out to one another, because we want to make sure that they're qualified estate planning attorneys, right? Qualified estate planning attorneys. Again, not the estate planning attorney who says, oh, I can write you a will, but doesn't really know squat diddly.
Yeah.
Now, Amy, you just talked about qualified. What about on TV when you see those will kits that are advertised? That is one of the questions in the chat. And they also want to know, should they get a software system to do their will?
Now, I'm biased. Again, I always try to tell when I'm biased. And this is one of those things where people have walked into my office with the Susie Orman kit, right? It's a yellow box. So I've seen it a number of times. And it is why lawyers cost is because you get advice. I say you can actually do anything on your own. You can actually have surgery on yourself if you want to, but do you want to do it yourself? Because there's a reason why we have the information, the questions. And I say oftentimes, maybe for the 18-year-old who doesn't really have a whole lot of assets and the impact isn't all that great, isn't that horrendous if you mess up. But I will say that if you have minor children, you want to make sure that you're doing the best for them. And if you're in a situation, if you're having one of those things, I will say that there is a major company that gives as an employee benefit an estate plan. And I was like so impressed until I saw the estate plan. And I saw that it was like a will mill, right? And what I would want to know is I would want you to make sure that you're getting legal advice.
Mhm.
Right? That's really this is really important because we know the pitfalls. And it's not that I am, well, I am amazing, but it's not that I know all those things. But the reality is talking to a lawyer will ask you those questions that you didn't expect to ask, right? Because you don't know the questions to ask. And if you're just going to go push the buttons to say, okay, yeah, I want to will, and this is what I got, you don't know what are the pitfalls. You don't know how to protect. So I say that to say you can indeed do it yourself. If you have little to risk, if you have a little risk involved, then go for it. But if you have something significant, like you want to make sure that the person that who's going to make decisions for you is the right person, then you might want to talk to someone who has some experience and knowledge.
Mhm. So Amy, you are amazing. And I must say that. And I am so thankful that you've been here to share your knowledge with our group. And if you see the emojis, folks are clapping and heart and everything that are coming up. So that's just to show you how much we've enjoyed you presenting. I do have a question though regarding Texas. Now, this is personal to me because I've got family in Texas. My sister specifically, who is dealing with a situation, a will that, well, a situation with her house. Her husband is deceased, who says she is a part owner of the house, but her name is nowhere to be found.
I'm a lawyer. And there's a scripture that says, write the vision, make it plain. But I like to say, if it ain't written, it ain't so.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I could say something different, but I can't.
No, that's just it. That's just it. And there are some other questions here. How much is the cost, the process of a probate? What's that usual range?
So again, it's the cost of the probate is dependent upon your assets. The more assets you have, the more you got to pay for court fees.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask this. I'm still seeing a lot of questions with not a lot of time. Does it make sense to have a part two at some point?
Somehow, Herman, you're garbly.
Yeah,
I was asking, can you hear me now?
not really well.
I don't know what happened.
I don't know.
In the chat.
Okay. As Herman goes to the chat, we'll keep going. What about handicapped minors and adult children? Are they exempt from disinvestment of inheritance interest in Louisiana?
So I cannot speak to the Louisiana specifically. I will say to you that there are a lot of benefits, but there are contingencies, right? So if you have a person with special needs, we need to be really thoughtful about how do we prepare and plan for them. Because in planning for a person with special needs, what we know is if they receive even the smallest bit of assets, if it puts them over the estate, the asset allowance, they're going to lose or get their benefits reduced. And so we're very thoughtful. We were just actually having, there was a case like that this morning where someone received, it was a payable on death distribution, so that they received a check because somebody did payable on death to someone who was receiving governmental benefits. And Social Security knew instantaneously before the check arrived in the mail, Social Security knew that they were going to exceed their exemption list. So we need to be thinking about how do we plan for that.
Okay. Here's another one, and I don't know about you, Herman and LaTanya, if you're seeing other questions, but I thought this was a good one. Transfer of death deed are good for real estate, But what about personal property such as a diamond, furs, designer bags, shoes? How is that handled, as I have been asked by many of times?
Right. So, and let me just also express that you should, the answer is it's a challenge, right? Because you're supposed to go through those things. You need to go through court in order to have it managed appropriately. Because otherwise someone could just walk in and say, okay, no, I'm taking this, oh, okay, it's my Contigo, but you're taking that China thing. So you need to be thinking about how do we protect it? And that's either a trust or a will.
Mm-hmm.
Cora,
Okay.
we're getting questions from if your beneficiary in the will lives in another country. What are the rules around that, Amy?
So the answer is it depends. And so it depends on a number of things. One of which is if that person, if your state is a state that has an inheritance tax, like Maryland has an inheritance tax for people who are not your biological, or not your child or your parent. And so no matter where you are and where you go, that's taxed, right? And so you can, depending on the amount it is, because you can gift a much, you can make a gift. So being thoughtful about it, the answer is so it depends, because it depends on the country that you're going to, right? That the asset is going to.
And this is why we need wise counsel to do an
Mhm.
estate plan for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's one. If you are joint title and the other person passes away, they do not have a will. The property goes to the other person. Question mark?
So there's two ways that it can be held, property can be held. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which is the last man standing law, or then there's tenancy in common, which is like, say, example, my sister and I bought a property together or inherited property together. So when I die, my half goes to my kids, and when she dies, her half goes to hers, as opposed to that it becomes the other person's. So if my sister dies, of course, she does have a will, but if it would be directed by her will or the probate process or her trust.
Cora, we still have more questions coming in, and Herman was able to text me. He said, this sounds like we need to have a part 2 to this session.
Well, we are indeed willing, if we can get our speaker back.
Absolutely.
Because this has been fantastic. This has been absolutely fantastic. So guys, you let us know, give us the emojis to let us know if we would be willing to come back for a second round. I don't know if you can see them, Amy, but they're flooding the screen right now. I've never seen that many emojis come up from, I mean, this is amazing.
Amy, is there an
Great.
email you would like to provide?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to put it in the chat and then I started talking.
Because they have asked.
I was even well behaved.
Cora, do you see these emojis? I have
I
never seen
do,
it
I
blow up
do.
like this. And it's just because we all know how important this is. Legacy planning
Right.
is something that has to be top of mind. As we are trying to close this wealth gap, Amy, I look to you to be that beacon of light, to put us
Oh,
on the right path.
I'm
Yeah.
excited that people are interested, and because again, these people are amazing people and can be transformational. So I'm excited that we're sewing into this folks.
And
Right.
I want people to understand, as you counsel, please make sure you share this perspective with your clients. It's not just about getting into the house. It's not just about repairing the credit. It's about also preserving the wealth you accumulate and transferring it. We're about to embark upon the largest transfer of wealth ever known to man. And it helps to have a plan that outlines your wishes, that is documented legally.
But I also want to state that you've got to partner with someone in your area. If you're not near Amy, if you can't form a relationship with her, it's critical that you partner with someone in your local community that can share this information, someone that you trust, because we know that there, Marie is saying that what should we do if we hire an attorney, but it doesn't go well, it doesn't work out, and things just are not done properly. So you've got to hire someone that you trust. And the other part that I would want to say, it's also important that this is not a class to make you all attorneys, okay? This is a class to learn from someone who has practiced law for many years and has the knowledge and skills on all of the stuff that she's shared with us today. So this is great. This has been fantastic. Herman, Latanya, do you see any other questions?
There are so many questions, but I think we have to close out. And I want everyone to see that Amy's email is in the chat. It's AIMEE@lifeandlegacy.law. If you take nothing away from today, please get wise counsel, because as Cora said, we do not expect you to become attorneys, but we do want to socialize. As Herman said, that we can put people into houses, but we have to learn how to help them protect these assets so they can transfer it to their legacy. Thank you so much, Cora. I'll have you close us out.
This has been excellent, Amy. We've truly enjoyed it. I can tell by all of the comments and the emojis coming up from our group. We've had almost 300. We had a strong 280 that actually listened to all that you had to share. This has been great for me. I can't thank you enough for being present and sharing your thoughts and ideas with us. I know our audience enjoy what you've shared, and I can't wait to bring you back again. Latanya is saying the same thing. So this has been fantastic. Herman, Latanya, any final comments?
Part 2.
All right, Amy, we'll get back in touch with you for part 2 then.
All
Herman?
right.
All right, everyone is saying part 2. Herman, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's just, I hope I'm not garbled, but thank everybody. Amy, thank you for another amazing presentation. Cora, thank you for the platform. Thank Diversified Resource Network. Thank our sponsors. Again, Wells Fargo, Freddie Mac, and TD Bank. So thank everybody. Appreciate you. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
And you will get a copy of today's presentation along with the recording. We'll send that out to you within 24 hours of today's presentation. Christy will handle all of that and get all of that information over to you, along with other handouts that we pulled that I think would be worthwhile to you as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all being on. Thank you, Amy. Really
Amy,
appreciate you. You are
hats
the
off
best.
to you, Amy.
My pleasure.
Look at the emojis. This is a testament to your work.
We're better together. We're better together.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.